Hi there. Good morning or good afternoon. A very warm welcome to Volvo Group Live. This is the first in a series of online events where we would like to share with you the knowledge of our own Volvo Group experts on topics that matter. My name is Céline Grezard and I will be your moderator today. We are broadcasting live from our home. My home is in Lyon, in France. Uh, and what about you? Where are you watching us from? Can I see some flags popping up in the comments and treat me to a virtual trip around the world? Today, we will be talking about resilience in the workplace. Resilience is our ability to cope with stress and uncertainty. And sure enough, we've had a great deal of that this year. We will discover what weakens our resilience and how we can replenish it. Today, our guest speaker is Hamira Riaz, who has a strong background in psychology and is today our Vice President for Strategic Leadership at one of the Volvo Group entities dedicated to trucks technology. A very warm welcome to you, Hamira. Thank you for joining us
Thank
today.
you, Celine.
I
My
would like to
pleasure.
say a few words about who you are. So you are a chartered clinical psychologist. You're also an associate fellow of the British Psychology Society. You have two doctorates and a specialism in neuropsychology. And before joining the Volvo Group, you've had a career of 30 years providing neuroscience service for the NHS and the Ministry of Defense, and last but not least, providing leadership consultancy globally. Before I hand over
Indeed.
to you, Hamira, I would like to invite our audience, I would like to invite you to post your comments, your reflections in the feed. Hamira's presentation will take about 25 minutes and we will dedicate ample time for your questions live. By the way, if you know someone who is interested in the topic, don't hesitate to write their name in the feed and they will receive an automatic notification. I would like to start with asking you a first question, Hamira. Why is it relevant to talk about resilience these days?
So, resilience has been creeping into public discourse, Celine, for the past 5 years, I would say. But it's largely still been the preserve of mental health professionals and sports psychology. But this year, with the global pandemic, resilience has become part of the lexicon for all of us.
Mm.
So, I think it's really important that we find a vocabulary to talk about resilience, make sure that we're talking about the same thing. But also, I found particularly that I was getting a lot of questions around how to make how to sort of understand all the advice that we've been getting about meeting the challenges this year. There's been a tsunami of advice this year, and it's been difficult to know what applies to us, when, how, etc. So this was about helping people to find shortcuts through the literature, but also through the advice.
Thank you, Hamira. Can we start perhaps with a definition of resilience?
Well, the traditional definition has come from the military and the nursing professions. That's where resilience was originally defined. And it was to identify people who had the grit, the gumption, the strength of character to deal with those emergency situations. So that has been, and the definition reflects that, the capacity to recover from challenge and to deal with stress, to be knocked down and to get back up. But I think when you're working with resilience and people who are challenges around resilience, and I'll come on to the metaphors, for me, that feels like a very fixed quality, and it's less easy to work with in conversation with someone who feels quite stuck. Either you've got resilience or you haven't, doesn't really allow for many options.
Yeah,
So we'll
so
come
so
on to
that's
it
the
later.
thing. Do we say that okay, I am a resilient person because I was born this way, or is that something that goes up and down, and perhaps I can develop it?
Well, you're preempting the presentation, Celine. So stick with us for a few minutes, and we'll be going into the very fantastic. Well, thank you first of all, Celine, for the kind introduction. And I'm watching the comments page and seeing people joining us from across all the time zones. So Brazil to India, Sweden, Belgium, Lyon, fantastic. So I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour through this so that we can, after about the next sort of 20 minutes, I'll stop talking and answer all your questions. And I'll pause at certain points and ask you to think about questions as we go through the presentation, because we're going to cover quite a lot. And if we move on to the next slide, um, we can perhaps think about why this year resilience is very important to, if you think you already know about resilience, why it's important to reconnect with it this year. So this, many of you will recognize as being, it's a very old-fashioned psychology theory from the 1940s. It's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But I think as a visual, this is it sort of highlights why this year COVID has affected us psychologically the way that it has. And you can see with this hierarchy that safety is right at the base of the pyramid. And it's difficult for human beings to enjoy all the other achievements and rewards of life that we construct for ourselves if our safety needs are not met. So I'd suggest to you then that because the pandemic has posed an existential threat to all of us, we all feel less safe than we did a year ago. And when the ground beneath your feet feels more shaky, then our threshold for stress is reduced, and we are triggered more quickly. And more often. And certainly that's felt to be the sort of journey of a lot of people this year, is we just feel that we're handling stress less well and that we're more often triggered. So let's move on to the next slide, please. I said, Celine, that we'd come back to this idea of the definition of resilience and how I felt it useful to talk about this in the many conversations I've had this year about resilience. So I think, as I said, the traditional view of resilience has been this fixed entity. Either I'm a resilient person or I'm not. That's not the experience of people who I've seen over the years with resilience challenges. They have very often been high performing, very successful, very resilient people. They're still very strong characters, strong personalities with a track record of amazing achievement. And it's therefore hard and probably not terribly constructive to be talking about resilience being lost. For me, and this is where the literature has been going the last several years, resilience is more a system. It's almost like an engine. It's a fuel source. And what that means is, if you think about it from that perspective, resilience has inputs which replenish your resilience. There are things you can do to boost your resilience. And our system of resilience can be drained by some of the challenges and the stresses that we face. So there are inputs and outputs. And our job is to constantly recalibrate the inputs and the outputs to make sure that we stay in equilibrium. So if we move to the next slide. And with that holistic systems perspective on resilience, this is a framing device. It's not a model. I don't think the world needs another model of resilience. We've already had far too many of those. This is a framing device, and this is to help people to cut through everything they're hearing about resilience, everything they're reading, and all the advice that they're getting. And essentially, what I ask people to do is think about resilience through three lenses: psychological, everything to do with your head; physical, everything to do with your body; and social, all about our context, our environment, our relationships. As we go on to the next slide, then, let's start with psychological resilience. And on Oh, we've lost the slides. There we go. Back again. Um, Fabulous. This is a lot on this slide, but essentially it encapsulates a conversation about psychological resilience. On the far left-hand side, we have factors that we know boost psychological resilience. In the middle, these are things that can happen to drain your psychological resilience. And then the far right-hand side are the signs that your psychological resilience is compromised. So let's begin on the left-hand side. And any questions at all about this particular section, please put them into the chat box, and Celine will be keeping an eye on those, and I will certainly address them at the end. Psychological resilience is boosted if we are leveraging our strengths, playing to our strengths, we are pursuing our passions, we are living our purpose, and we are honoring our value set, our personal value set. Resilience is drained, conversely, if we feel our strengths are not recognized, they are underplayed, or indeed we are overusing our strengths and the dark side of our strengths is showing up. But it's also compromised if we are cut off for any period of time from what makes you happy. We are hedonistic creatures, and we do need to feel pleasure and joy in the moment. So if we're cut off from our passion, our psychological resilience is reduced. But apart from hedonism, we are also meaning making individuals. We need to feel that we fit in somehow into a bigger story. So it's important from a resilience perspective that we're doing what seems to matter, that it matters that we're on the planet. So if you're not doing what matters, if how you spend your time feels meaningless, that can have an effect on your psychological resilience. And finally, we know from the work on burnout that if you find yourself acting against your conscience, if there is a clash of values, then that can lead to a serious resilience challenge. And it's the most often cited factor in burnout. Previously high performing people who have burnt out most often say it's due to a clash of values. Either they are doing work for an organization whose values they cannot get behind, or they are being managed by somebody who has a different value set, or there is some kind of crisis of conscience. And what are the signs that your psychological resilience is being compromised? Well, I would suggest that it's the monkey mind. The monkey mind is an age-old concept. It comes from it's got Chinese heritage. It's a Buddhist concept, and it's a mind that is unsettled and impatient and frustrated and bubbling away all the time. And it can mean it shows up as almost like being stuck in your thoughts, preoccupied by worry, a closed loop. You can't seem to get out of something. It keeps going round and round your head. It can show up in your emotions, that you are leaky in the way that your emotions are shown. You might struggle to have impulse control. Your irritation might show, your anger might show. And finally, in behaviors that are uncharacteristic. And these can be acting out behaviors, but they can also be almost like an indecisiveness, not acting at all. So that, in a nutshell, is psychological resilience. So if we go to the next slide, if you feel like, how do I check that my psychological resilience is intact? Here are three questions you can ask yourself. Are there signs that your monkey mind is more in charge this year than it's ever been before? And I've given some indicators there. Would it benefit you if it is the case that you feel like your monkey mind is in charge? Would it benefit to intentionally deactivate your mind more? And this is where all that advice about being careful where you get your news, how much time do you spend on social media? Are you switching off your notifications so that you're not constantly being pinged by your devices? Are you reducing your screen time 2 hours before you go to sleep? This kind of advice that we're getting is all about the mind, deactivating the mind, pressing pause. And then the final question I would ask is, are there some automatic thinking styles that are showing up that would suggest that your monkey mind is dominating and that you're feeling the stress disproportionately? And by automatic thinking styles, I'm thinking of, for example, an all or nothing thinking style. For example, if we don't do it this way, then it's wrong. Or this is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong, this is success, this is failure. If we find ourselves making binary judgments in our minds or out loud, it could be that we're falling into an all or nothing mindset. Another thing, unhelpful thinking style is overgeneralizing. For example, why is it that nothing works? Or everything is always rubbish. If you're finding yourself using words like everything, nothing, always, it's a suggestion that you are falling into the trap of overgeneralizing. And finally, and a third one, and there are many, many unhelpful thinking styles. You can Google unhelpful thinking styles, and there are some great visuals about different types of traps you can fall into from a brain perspective. But labeling is another one. So if you find yourself saying, "Oh, that's so stupid," or "That's so idiotic," then these negative emotional value judgments are an indication of labeling. It's a shortcut that your brain uses when you're feeling really upset and you're stuck in something. It's not helpful. It will, if unhelpful thinking styles spiral, then they're the most often the reason why we see people for anxiety and depression. It's because they've got stuck in an unhelpful thinking style and they need ways, someone to help them to press pause and come out of that style. So that's psychological resilience in a nutshell. And if you have any questions, Celine will be keeping track of them. But we want to move now on to physical resilience, everything to do with the body. So let's move on to that one. So again, we've got this slide that on the left-hand side is how you can boost your physical resilience. In the middle, how your physical resilience can be drained, and then the signs. And here we're talking about the body and we're talking about physiology. Good physical resilience: sleep well, eat well, exercise well. It's obvious. However, why? And the why is our body is controlled by a set of systems, part of the nervous system. There's two parts to it, actually. They sit in, they complement each other. They are a sister system. One is the sympathetic nervous system, which is responsible for activating us into action and reaction. And then we have the complementary system, the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to calm us down and get us into recovery and rest. Those systems work in harmony and in balance, and as would make sense, we want to make sure that for as much as we're activated, that we're also in recovery and we get enough recovery and rest. And so physical resilience is compromised when that balance is lost between the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, you may know, you may not, you may think you don't know about the sympathetic nervous system, but you've probably come across it in something called the fight-flight reaction. The fight-flight reaction is a evolutionary survival mechanism that we share with all primates. It's subconscious and it's coordinated by the sympathetic nervous system. Every time we feel under threat, the fight flight reaction kicks in. As I said, we share that with primates. But it was, from an evolutionary perspective, it was designed to respond to real threat, real danger when our lives are at risk. And here comes the issue when it comes to physical resilience. We are the only creatures on the planet who can get a fight-flight reaction to perceived threat. It's what Dostoevsky used to talk about as the curse of consciousness. The curse of being human is the fact that we reflect on what's happened and we also think ahead to the future. In doing so, we tell ourselves stories, and some of those stories can be frightening about how safe we are and what the future might look like. What that means in terms of our physiology is we can spook our body into a threat reaction. We are the only creatures who do that. You can worry your body into a fight flight reaction. and that can impact your resilience. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Obviously, the converse of good nutrition, good sleep, good fitness is that poor nutrition, lack of fitness, and inadequate sleep hygiene can knock out physical resilience as well. And so, what are the signs that our physical resilience, our body is not coping? I've split it into two things: highs, restless limbs, nervous tension, can't sit still, insomnia, metabolic stop start, not being able to digest the food that we're used to eating, and feeling full and bloated, and also over exercising, pushing yourself to feel better by exercising more, but actually not getting the benefits of more exercise. So that's one type of sign that physical resilience, the balance is wrong. But then there's also lows, lethargy, tiredness, aches and pains you can't explain, eating more, but again, not enjoying it, and sleeping a lot, but not feeling recovered. So, if you feel again that you maybe your body is feeling challenged this year, then if we move on to the next slide, there's some questions that I would ask. Are there signs that your body is being spooked into a fight flight reaction? And we've got some indicators there for you to look at. Would you benefit from thinking about your fitness regime in a more balanced way, and therefore balancing high intensity workouts with low activation exercise, Tai Chi, yoga, Pilates? And then finally, if you buy into the idea that we can spook our body into a threat reaction, we can also fool our body into calming down. And then here, this is the reason why we're getting advice about meditation apps, about relaxation training, about listening to classical music, about all the sleep hygiene that you can do: blackout blinds, earplugs, no screens in your bedroom, no screen time for 2 hours before you sleep, no rich food in the evening, no high intensity workouts after 6 p.m., etc., etc. No alcohol during the work week. All of this advice is about calming your body down and not activating it in the wrong way when you're about to go into rest and recovery mode. So, again, whistle stop tour, lots to talk about. Please put your questions in chat. And then finally, let's move on to the smallest literature on resilience. That's social resilience. And I think until this year, very little time was really devoted to this as a separate type of resilience. But of course, for obvious reasons, it's become a talking point. And what do I mean by social resilience, and how can you boost it? Well, our social resilience is at its very best when we have a stable support network. We have relationships that are characterized by psychological safety. And what do I mean by that? This means it doesn't matter what mistake you've made, doesn't matter if you failed at something. There is at least one relationship in your life where you can talk to somebody, you know you won't be judged badly, they have your best interests at heart, they're on your side, you trust them. So that's the stable support scaffolding that we need for social resilience. But we also, boundary management is really important with regards to social resilience. And what do I mean? I mean that actually we all play multiple roles in our lives. So at the same time, you can be mother, sister, daughter, lover, employee, direct report, team leader, and peer. And those are just naming a few, right? So, all these different identities, for you to feel at your very best in those and show up at your best, needs to be some kind of boundary between them. So, you switch on parts of yourself to express these different elements of your identity. And this is boundary management. The most obvious one would be work and life outside of work. How do we make sure that we switch off from work to enjoy our personal life? How do we switch off from our personal life in order to focus on work? Um, and having the right kind of boundaries in place helps social resilience. The final thing, and obviously we don't have that anymore, is a predictable, safe world. So the converse, the reason why we are all compromised with regards to social resilience, I would argue this year, is because the world has become a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The boundaries between fundamental aspects of our lives, work and our personal life, have become disrupted because many of us have had to work from home. Many of us have had to parent and educate our children at home while we're working. So our boundaries are fuzzy. And finally, we've not been able to see and spend time in the way that we want to with the people that we have grown used to depending on for our social resilience. So, for all of those reasons, we found as the year has kept on, um, social resilience has been compromised. And for me, the signs that social resilience are challenged, we go back to another theory in psychology, long, big literature. It's called attachment theory. And you can go online and find out what your attachment style is. And what does this mean? This means how do we respond to people when we're under stress? And the attachment theory suggests that we find patterns that we use patterns of responding to people under stress that are based on our family relationships when we were very young. And the two that I think come into play for social resilience are when we're under stress, we may either have an anxious kind of attachment pattern, which means we seek out people, we want more advice, we want to check in, we want more data. So we show a neediness and we want reassurance that we're in control from other people. That's anxious attachment. Or we are avoidant attachment. And avoidant attachment is when we feel under stress, we withdraw into our cave. We want more time to ourselves. We keep our own counsel. We pull away. We withdraw. And so those are the sort of two fundamental patterns of attachment that might be useful to think about when it comes to social resilience. And more often than not, even if you have not noticed that your resilience levels have been affected and you're showing some of the signs of that, the people around you will be able to tell you, or you're spending much more time on your own, or you're withdrawing a little bit, or you're not sleeping as well, or you're a bit more irritable. So checking in with the people around you often gives you clues as to whether maybe you're missing some of your signals. So that's social resilience. Let's then move on to the questions that you might want to ask yourself if you feel that social resilience has been an issue. Are there signs that your social resilience is worn down? I've got some indicators there. Are you struggling with boundary management? And the concept that I found quite helpful in my conversations about social resilience this year is this idea of being a segmenter versus being an integrator. It's an idea that's been around since 1996, but there was a great Huffington Post article in August this year that brought it back into focus because you might have a preferred style. You might be a segmenter, someone who needs to have geographical boundaries to split your home life and your work life. You might really like going to the office, and then on your commute back home, you switch off from work so that you can enjoy your family life in the evening. That's a segmenter style. Well, obviously, segmenters have been really struggling with working from home because they've no longer got an office to go to. There's no geographical separation anymore. So I would suggest that the working from home issue has been a big one for segmenters. Integrators, on the other hand, are people who sit in a coffee shop and do their work, right? So they're not bothered about people walking around and lots of noise. They switch between their personal life and their professional life very seamlessly. They've got a baby in one hand and they're doing a Zoom call with the other, and they find that quite natural. Even integrators have struggled with working from home because if you're an integrator on your own terms, that's very different from suddenly finding yourself an integrator managing all your different sides of your life because actually your family is now at home with you during the workday. So I think that's quite an interesting distinction. What's your preferred style? Does it match your working environment? And how has COVID affected that? And then finally, if your social resilience is being compromised, then how are you responding to that? Are you withdrawing or are you seeking more reassurance? That's thinking about your attachment pattern might be useful. And in that respect, who are you seeking out? Does it make sense to start to think about who you're spending your time with this year? And one of the key themes that has come out this year has been people saying, I'm much more selective about who I spend time with because I need a certain kind of energy from my interactions. And even though I love my very very much, I find those conversations draining, so I'm having less of them. So it's a tough question to ask yourself which of your relationships boost your resilience levels, but you may find some of the people you love the most are actually quite draining when it comes to your resilience. So I've run over, I think, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So, Celine, I'm going to hand over back to you now and just see what are the questions, what are the themes in the questions that are coming up the most.
We've received lots and lots of questions, so thank you everyone for being so into this and interacting with us. Um, Perhaps I will start with a question from Marie, who's asking if you see, Hamira, any differences in
Oh my
resilience
goodness, that's
between
such a good question.
generations.
So I'm not sure if I see any particular differences as a result of COVID within generations. But I would say that we talked about the mind body relationship a little bit, psychological resilience and physical resilience. And I talked about the fact that the mind can spook the body into activation, overactivation. I think there's a generational difference there. I've certainly noticed it. So until the age of around 40, broad generalization, I know, but hear me out. Until the age of 40, the mind, for me, has tyranny over the body. It's a tyrant. The mind will always tell the body, you can do it, push through, work harder, sleep less, eat what you like, drink what you like, you'll be fine. And the body is completely subjugated to what the mind thinks is possible. Soon as the hormones start to change in the 40s for men and for women, and I'm 53, so I talk from experience. I can promise you the body gets its revenge. So the body, so now, by the time you get to my age at 53, you have to, in the morning, you wake up, you check with your body. Can I get up now? Should I be doing this? What should I eat? Should I work this hard? Do I need to relax a bit? Do I need to do my early morning jog, etc.? The body no longer tolerates the mind's tyranny. It will challenge back and it won't do what you ask. So that is definitely a generational difference due to the hormonal changes that people go through in their 40s. Some people can make that happen by pushing their bodies too hard and injuring themselves earlier on in their lives. So that's a feature. So I'm going to stop there because there's lots more I can say about that. But hopefully that answers your question, Marie.
Yes, thank you, Hamira. I have another question from Ting, actually. It's been a very tough year for everyone around the planet in our lives, but also at work. So when we see that co-workers show lower level of resilience, what can we really do? And, this thing about
Yeah.
keeping a positive spirit,
Not
does it really
necessarily. So
help?
we haven't had a chance to talk about personalities and resilience. And this sort of optimistic, positive mindset that we're all asked to continuously think about, it really does depend what kind of personality you have. If you are a pessimist by nature, and somebody telling you to cheer up and smile and have a positive, it's the last thing you want to hear, because pessimists have some thinking styles that are very helpful to them. They prepare for the worst. They problem solve. They put plans in place to make sure that they're ready for the worst that can happen. So to tell them not to do that, but instead stay positive, not think about the problem solving, the planning for the worst, is the worst thing that you can do. And that's borne out by performance. It undermines their performance if they're not allowed to plan for the worst. So I think we have to be careful about pushing people into this optimistic mindset when they're not ready to. So how can we help? That was the question. And if you do go onto the website, and I know you're going to talk about this, Celine, towards the end, we have got some exercises that you can do. The first thing I would suggest is that you have a shared language around resilience. Hopefully today you've got a sense of what that language might look like. Secondly, give permission to talk about resilience in the workplace, because until more recently, it's been seen as an introspective thing that you do on a personal level. Right? You have a personal relationship with resilience, so you do your work on your own and you show up at work resilient. I would suggest that actually we need to make that a workplace conversation. So you, as a senior person, even as a peer, you need to create permissions in the system to talk about resilience, an ongoing dialogue with yourself and with your colleagues. And then the third piece is there's lots of helpful exercises that you can do with your teams in order to check resilience levels, diagnose if there is a particular resilience challenge that's showing up in the team. For example, you can get teams that suddenly become quite controlling of the detail. And if you interact with that team, you get constant emails about, could you provide me with a spreadsheet? Could you give me data? Could you tell me this? And there's this incessant, desperate need for information. For me as a psychologist, I'm thinking anxious attachment. So there's not enough resilience in that team. Why are they suddenly bombarding me with requests for stuff that I don't think is important? Why are they checking in so much? Checking in because they feel out of control. So you can continue, you can turn that individual dialogue into a collective dialogue. You can then apply the signs on a team level. Think about how are you interacting in your system as a result of your own resilience challenges. So
Mm.
again, I'm going to stop there because I could talk a lot more about that.
We have another question here about since we are, staying at home and working from home and being
Mm.
stuck between four walls, it is a reality that domestic violence happens, and when we can be, indirectly a witness of that for a coworker, how can we support?
Yeah, I think the issue is that I talked right about at the beginning that what COVID has done has it's reduced our threshold for stress and we're all triggered. So there's more road rage, there's more anger, there's more irritation, there's more impatience, there's more snappiness in the world generally because our system is pressurized, we're constrained. So the pressure is building up in our human system. And therefore, of course, for those people in more difficult situations where relationships were not working before, the cracks have now developed to the extent where those relationships and those living environments are broken. So you're seeing more domestic violence, you're seeing more addiction, you're seeing all sorts of quite destructive, self-sabotaging behavior. So how do you support people like that? Well, if it's a lot, the chances are it's not a new thing. It's an amplification of an existing issue. Therefore, you want to be the safe place. It goes back to this idea of safety. And safety means respect for someone's readiness to talk. It means no judgment, no value judgments. And it means not jumping in with fixing someone's problems because you're not the expert. And I say that as a clinical psychologist with 30 years of helping. I never see myself as an expert when somebody comes. They are the expert on their problem. I'm there to listen, to hear, to receive. And if they want, I will share my opinion, but only if I am given permission to. So no advice until I'm asked. And even then, it's my view. It's one perspective. So create safety, um, be the safe haven, and wait and be patient and be non judgmental and don't jump in with advice and solutions. It's not your problem to fix. It's their problem to solve. You're there to help.
I will take that wise advice on board, Hamira. Another question. You talked about trying to switch off, not to be too much on the phone, and switching off
Mm,
notifications and stuff like that. And at the same time, we need those tools to work. And since we are
yeah,
working from home, the boundaries between work and personal life is becoming more and more blurry. How can
yes.
we manage that?
Yeah, I think so. There's a couple of things that you can do. The things that worked for you before, don't make the assumption they can work for you this year. If nothing in your life has changed significantly this year in the way that you use your time, the people that you see, the habits that you have, all of these fundamental building blocks of the way that we spend our time, if nothing has significantly changed, you need to look again. Because this year, this whole thing, this experience that we've been through, if you're not changed significantly as a result of this, you've missed an opportunity. So what does that mean? It means yes, we have to perform, but we have to perform differently. Yes, we have to maintain our connection to the world. We have to do it differently. Yes, we have to look after ourselves. We have to do it differently. So you have to question everything you do, and I've certainly done it on a personal level. Everything I eat, everything I watch on TV, every book I read, every person I speak to, every single thing I have challenged, and the changes I've made are micro changes. They're not big, they're little. It's what gives me pleasure I hang on to. If it's not giving me pleasure anymore, I have to substitute it with something else. And I don't stop until I find something that gives me that pleasure pop that I need. If there was things that I used to read that now I'm finding I'm distracted and preoccupied and it drains my energy, why is it? Should I be reading something else? So, for example, I don't read any professional journals before I go to sleep anymore, because I'm finding that in the past I used to love thinking about that stuff and dreaming about that stuff. But now the stress level is so high, I don't want to be thinking about psychology before I go to sleep. So I'm reading really escapist fiction. Really, really escape Harry Potter, which I never read, but my daughter gave me hers, and I thought, I'll read it. I love it. I want to think about wizards, and I want to think about all of that stuff, and it's helping. So micro changes that make the difference, the small things in life. But you're only going to do that if you question every bit of scaffolding that you currently have in your life that you're relying on to stay above that resilient threshold.
Thank you, Hamira, for sharing your personal experience a little bit. Eric had a question in that vein, asking about if you are practicing the advice yourself.
Oh, so
Uh,
many things, Eric. So many things.
we have another question from Siddiq, who's asking how you reflect upon an important factor in our recovery is how we explain the situation to ourselves in our mind, the
Yes,
story we
yes,
tell ourselves.
yes, yes, for sure. We are storytellers. Again, I don't want to simplify things too much. We are complex, we are messy. That's the nature of being human. But actually, fundamentally, we're storytellers, and it's changing our story that will create change. Right. So when I talked about the kinds of words that might start to become sticky, that you should pay attention to with unhealthy thinking styles, the psychological resilience piece, I'm talking about the language that you're using to yourself. If you find your inner critic is showing up in your head, you know, I'm not doing that right, I'm stupid, I'm a loser, anything that's harsh and self-critical, this is not your voice. This is your inner critic, right? So you need to, where's it coming from? And it's not coming from a helpful place. So we need to examine the narrative in our mind. And especially if you're feeling stuck, if you can't get out of a loop of thinking and you're using the same words over and over again, that's the time to stop, reflect on your narrative, write it down, share it with someone you love and respect who loves you, and hear what they have to say. And basically, that's the role of a therapist. A therapist sits there and listens to you. And when you are in dire straits, a person tells you their story, and you say, "Let me repeat that back to you. What you have just said about yourself." If a friend said that to you and said they were feeling that way, what would you say to them? And they will always give the right advice. Oh, you're an amazing person. You've done amazing things. There's no way you're like that. It's like, why can't you do it for yourself? So this is a journey into a new level of self-compassion. So I think you're absolutely right. Your narrative, your story that you're telling yourself is it's a magic box. You can do so much with that story, and I would say from a resilience perspective, if you feel stuck in any way, that's the place to go, because it's probably the source of a lot of the issues, the language that you're using.
Thanks, Hamira. We have another question from Natalie, who's saying there are lots of studies that talk about the importance of focusing on the present and also focusing
Mm.
on what we can act upon versus what we can't influence, what is outside our sphere of influence. How do you comment on that, Hamira?
Completely. The serenity prayer, give me the wisdom to distinguish between what I can and can't control. And I can't remember the rest of it, but essentially so that you can act on the things that you can control, because everything else you can't act on. I think that's the fundamental message around resilience. And it speaks to when I was talking about intentionality and mindfulness. That's what I mean. Slow everything, build in pauses in your day. If you're not feeling good, and I do this again, this is another thing that I do, Eric. If I don't feel good, I stop and think, what, why? What's going on? What just happened? Who did I just talk to? What did I just eat? What did I just see? What just happened to make me not feel good? Immediate diagnosis doesn't mean you can immediately change it, but just knowing why there's been this up and down is a source of information that it's an ongoing dialogue. So it also allows you to drop those things that you can't do anything about. The computer breaks down. It's like, you can't do anything about that. You can get some help, but you're not going to be able to fix it. So let it go. Move on to something else. So absolutely, I feel like it's a fundamental aspect of the way that we're having to be, this need to be intentional, mindful, present. And also, I talked about this idea of the curse of consciousness. The curse of consciousness is not that we are conscious of the present moment. That's not the curse. That's the gift of consciousness, is that we can sit there and say, it's amazing to be alive right now. Right? The curse of consciousness is reflecting on the past and getting stuck in the past, and going into the future and thinking you can predict it. That's the curse of consciousness. So stay present. There's value to thinking about the future and the past, but there's also a lot of risk.
Hamira, we're talking about what we can do as individuals. What about what can be done at a collective level? Sorry, and I'm thinking, what is it that a company can do to help its employees become more resilient? And perhaps you can
Uh,
share here the experience of our entity group trucks technology.
Yes, absolutely, and beyond. So we did do it in GTT to start with, but it's now spread everywhere else. So we're getting lots of requests from the rest of the business to share what we've done. And it was very thought through. There was a plan behind this. I've worked in the learning and development space for a long time, and one of the things that, as a psychologist, and I was going to say one of the things, the most important thing is, it doesn't matter what you say, you just want it to land with the person in a useful way, for them to take away something, just one thing that's useful, and then to do something about it. That's all you want as a psychologist. Then you're happy, right? And that's what I want from anything that I do. I want everybody who sees me in any shape or form to take away one thing, to act on it, and then say, "Oh, I'm glad I did that." Right? If it's a tiny thing, I'm happy. And that's what we did in GTT. I know our employees and our people are busy. I know this year they've been more challenged than ever before. I'm not going to give you a 5-day training course on resilience. I will give you 30 minutes on resilience in 5 chapters of 6 minutes each. And you can watch those webinars you can listen to them, you'll get the same information, or you can watch it with the slideshow. And that's what we did. We put together a 30-minute webinar on resilience, covering the same material as I've shared with you today. They were in chapter form, and we allowed people, we shared it with people and said, but watch them at your leisure. Then the second stage was, we then had Q&As live, in as much as we just invited people to join us, where we could then work with the content. I could answer questions, we could do a Q&A like this, and just dig into the detail of what I was saying. Because I've always found with smart people, you can share complicated, they want to know complicated, they want to feel like they're an expert at the end of 30 minutes. So there's like, this is as much as you need to know about resilience, and you can have a conversation with anybody, and people will say, wow, you know a lot about resilience. That's what I wanted to offer our people. But in order for you to do that, you have to feel comfortable with the vocabulary and the concepts and all of that. So that's what the Q&A was about. Let's get comfortable with it all. And then on demand, we said, if you want to work with this individually, teams, reach out, and we will come and host sessions for you in a small team setting, whereby you can work with the exercises that we've shared, and you can work with the concepts, and you can actually do that work yourself. So that was the 3-phase approach that we used. A pull approach, not pushing it out there, just saying it's here. And we've had tremendous uptake around that. And we're going to use that way of sharing our knowledge, in the people and culture team, continuously with our leaders and with our employees. So we've subsequently gone on to do how to have difficult conversations with people, how to engage the team around stuff. We're going to be talking about performance versus potential. So there's lots of topics that we feel we've got lots of interesting things to say, but we want it to be useful, and we want people to work with it and act on it. Hopefully that is helpful in terms of just saying the approach we've taken, and that
Yeah.
seems to have worked.
Thanks, Hamira. I realize that we've passed our time, but we still have lots of questions. So for those of you who can stay on with us, for we're here for an extra 5-10 minutes. And those of you who have to leave, you've asked if this was recorded. Yes, it is recorded, and you can find it at the same link on LinkedIn. Hamira, we have actually a number of questions about, is it possible to become an expert at resilience? And is it true that if we've had to go through a lot in our lives, then we will become more resilient?
Yes, it's been. I don't think there are any experts on resilience. By the way, I don't think it's rocket science. It's not rocket science at all. You could argue too much is written about it and too much is said about it. It's how we work with the concept of resilience that's actually going to make the difference. So I do think after 30 minutes, you can talk about resilience in a way that helps other people to understand it in a clearer, in a clearer fashion, and to work with the concept of it in a better, more constructive way. So can you become an expert? Yes, you can. But an expert at helping people to apply the concept. This is not about understanding. This is about taking action. And so the questions you often get is, why do I feel the way I feel? I'm a really strong person. Why am I feeling strange? It's weird. Why am I acting this way? It's when people no longer understand their own experience. So what is a resilience expert? A resilience expert is someone who helps them to go through the concept of resilience and say, that's why. Now I understand. I can untangle it a little bit. And now I know the few things I'll try. And also, let me just say that whenever you try something, I always say to people, don't change anything unless you're willing to stick to it for 3 weeks. Okay, just as a rule of thumb, anything you change, you're going to change a new breakfast, to make yourself feel more energetic. Do it for 3 straight weeks. And don't make a judgment about it until then. Don't say it doesn't work until 3 weeks have gone by. And the 3 week rule applies to every little micro change when it comes to resilience. Don't expect anything to change until at least 3 weeks. You've consistently been doing it for 3 weeks, and then you can make a judgment call. So don't make lots of changes all at once. Do it in a planful, intentional way. Document it, and just look at the 3 week period and see how do you now feel before you make another set of changes. So that would be my advice.
Hmm. Thank you. That's a very practical takeaway. We have a question from Nay about those acronyms. The VUCA world, which
Oh
means
yeah.
volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And now there's a new acronym coming up, which is BANI, which means brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. So are we switching from one concept to the next? In
No,
this COVID crisis.
I think I said the brain loves shortcuts. The human brain loves shortcuts, and we could have another seminar on the silly ways in which the human brain makes a shortcut of our experience, right, and gets us into trouble, right? So two things: the way our brain shortcuts our experience, extremely helpful for us to be agile. The way our brain makes shortcuts gets us into a lot of trouble. So acronyms is, you know, VUCA was a military term. It was the US military term for the kind of world that soldiers encountered, I think, in the first Gulf War. That's what it was. And now, in the last few years, we've heard it in the corporate context. Oh, we live in a VUCA world. And basically, it's a world where it's everything, it's not as you expected. And the degree to which you are challenged is much more. And it goes back to safety. It's just not safe anymore. You can't predict. It can't be certain. It's too complex. It's all too much. So it goes back to safety, and therefore any new acronym essentially is a riff on that issue of we don't feel safe, and we react in characteristic ways when we don't feel safe, and they're not always helpful ways. So acronyms are fine as a shorthand between people to get you onto the same page, but they have a limited use, and they describe, they don't explain. So, you know, take it with a pinch of salt, I would say. I love the brittle thingy. That's the first time I've heard that one.
Yeah, me too. I had to Google it while you were talking.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, love it.
I think this is a very good note to end on, Hamira. If there was one thing you would like us to take away, what would that be?
This is a fuel source. Resilience is a fuel source. right? So we can all get better at it. And I would say, well, our resilience has been challenged this year, but we will need more resilience to navigate the new normal next year. It's not. This is the beginning of a new episode in the way that we inhabit this planet and the way that we interact with one. We'll never be the same again. So you're going to have to tap into, if you haven't done the work on resilience, your interior journey, your diagnostics, your reflections, your conversations with loved ones and colleagues, do it now. Do it now, and be ready for tapping into a new level of resilience, because you can. It's so easy. It sounds easy. You might need some help, and you might need to have lots of conversations. You might need to try lots of things, but it's not rocket science. So that would be my one thing. That it's got an enormous upside, understanding resilience better and doing the work. So I would encourage everybody to spend some time, especially over the next few weeks, as we get a break from all of this, a short break, and we press pause.
Absolutely. And we we've posted on our website on volvogroup.com a couple of tools, very practical and very useful for you to download and take the next step to look after yourself. Um, Thank you very much, Hamira, for your guidance and uh, taking that little step extra to look after ourselves. Um, this is well the end of our very first Volvo Group Live. We're coming back next year with more exciting topics, ranging from career tips to automation for dummies or data science for dummies, or we'll discover vehicles running on electricity, vehicles running without a driver, and much more about future transportation. So don't hesitate to follow Volvo Group on LinkedIn so you get notified each time we are going live. But for now, if you've enjoyed today's episode, don't hesitate to share the event or tag a friend. If you've not enjoyed today's episode, well, you're probably not around anymore, but let us know how we can get better next time. And if you have suggestions for future topics you'd like to discuss with us, we're delighted to hear your suggestions. Once again, thank you very much, Hamira. We've received very positive comments about your presentation today. I think it's helped a lot. Thank you for watching us. Congratulations, by the way, for taking almost an hour today in your busy agendas for well taking care of yourself. I wish you a great end of the year and take care of yourself. Stay safe and see you soon. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.